Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, in her first news conference since taking office, President Park Geun-hye lays out her policy priorities, promising to overhaul the export-driven economy into a more balanced one with dynamic domestic activities. Despite the rail union's strong opposition, the state-run rail operator is set to launch a subsidiary for a new bullet train line as early as this week. Plus, a polar vortex is expected to sweep across the Midwest United States and Canada, where at least 16 people have been killed by snowstorms. With wind chill, the temperature in some regions is forecast to dip below minus 50 degrees Celsius. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Cheong in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Let's start with President Park's New Year's press conference, her first since taking office in February last year. Speaking to the nation directly Monday morning, she laid out her plans for state affairs and took questions from reporters on a wide range of issues.
During the 80-minute-long conference, the president introduced her plans for the new year, which center on revitalizing the economy, bolstering national security, and reforming the nation's public enterprises.
And to give us more details on the press conference, we now go live to our presidential office correspondent, Eoh Jin-joo, who is standing by at the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae. So, Jin-joo, what is President Park's plan for the coming year?
Mark, economic revitalization will be President Park's key focus this year. The president presented a 3-year plan for economic reform, which he said was designed to let more people feel the effects of economic recovery. The president pledged to normalize abnormal practices in society and lay the foundation for a strong economy, starting with reforms in the public sector, including the normalization of state-owned institutions and fiscal and tax reforms. One of the problems she pointed out was the debt of public institutions, which she said is greater than the nation's fiscal debt. She also discussed the lax management of state-owned enterprises.
Jin-joo, President Park outlined her vision for a so-called creative economy last year, and that was also included in her 3-year plan. What more can you tell us about that aspect of the plan?
Well, President Park will be continuing her push for a creative economy over the next 3 years to build a more dynamic and innovative economy. She introduced her plans, which have been released in more detail in recent months, to set up offline towns for the creative economy in 17 provinces and cities so that anyone with good ideas can have the opportunity to set up their own business and enterprises can become more competitive with the help of new ideas. It will also expand what's been called the Creative Economy Vitamin Project, which brings existing industries together with science and information communications technology.
And the president also pledged to boost domestic consumption.
Yes, that's right. President Park vowed to create an economy that balances domestic demand and exports by supporting SMEs and fostering the 5 major service industries, the sectors of health, education, tourism, finance, and software, that have the potential to create more jobs and are preferred by young people. She promised to provide tailored support to SMEs, whether it be financial or tax support, and make these companies the new driving force of the country's exports to boost the nation's export competitiveness, which has traditionally relied on conglomerates. As for the 5 major service sectors, President Park made it clear that the government will ease or remove most of the regulations on them, except for the ones that are truly necessary. Now, the president predicts that this 3-year plan will increase Korea's potential growth rate by 4% and raise per capita income to as much as $40,000.
And Jin-joo, what is President Park's plan for this year when it comes to North Korea?
Yusan, one of President Park's key goals for this year is laying the foundation for a reunified Korea. Describing the current situation on the peninsula as severe, President Park stressed that it is now time to prepare for reunification and break away from threats of war and nuclear weapons. She said the biggest obstacle to reunification of the two Koreas and world peace is North Korea's nuclear program. The president vowed to closely cooperate with neighboring countries to persuade Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear program, but strengthen humanitarian aid to the communist regime. Now, when asked about a possible inter-Korean summit, President Park said she's always ready to talk with the North Korean leader if necessary, but made it clear that the North should take sincere steps first and show its sincerity through action rather than words.
All right, Jin-joo, thank you ever so much for your report there. That was our Eoh Jin-joo reporting on the President's New Year's press conference.
The top foreign policymakers from South Korea and the United States are due to meet in Washington this week for talks that are expected to focus primarily on North Korea and Japan. Meeting with reporters on Sunday local time, South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se said he will relay South Korea's position on Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, the resting place of several Class A war criminals.
It's not a simple matter between the two countries, but a shared interest of the international community. So I plan to deliver South Korea's stance to officials of all ranks that I meet in Washington.
Yoon and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry are scheduled to meet on Tuesday, where they will coordinate their North Korea policies following the recent execution of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, Jang Song-taek. They are also expected to discuss ways to restart the stalled six-party talks on the North denuclearization. During his visit, Yoon is also scheduled to meet with Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel and Senator Robert Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The U.S. is demanding that Seoul increase its share of the cost of stationing U.S. troops in Korea as the two sides prepare to resume talks on the issue in Seoul on Thursday. During the talks, the two sides are expected to discuss how to divide the cost of keeping the current force of 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea under the Special Measure Agreement. Sources told Seoul-based Yonhap News that Washington is demanding that Seoul contribute roughly $900 million US under the new agreement, an increase of 9.2% from the previous agreement, which expired last year. Seoul wants its contribution to be roughly $850 million, given the annual rate of increase under the previous 5-year agreement was capped at 4%, and there have been minimal changes in the number of troops and the conditions in which they serve. Independent lawmaker An Cheol-soo's plan to form his own political party to challenge the dominance of the two leading parties has taken another step forward. His New Politics Committee has recruited a veteran conservative strategist as its fifth co-chair. Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Eoh Jin-joo, former environment minister and veteran strategist who has long been associated with the conservative bloc, is now officially part of An Cheol-soo's team aimed at promoting his vision of new politics. The 74-year-old strategist is known as An's political mentor.
Former Environment Minister Eoh Jin-joo is firmly convinced that Korea is in need of regional reform.
Yoon said he felt a sense of responsibility to support An.
I've been thinking that the constant confrontation between the two rival parties has long divided the country into two. I also thought the event of An Cheol-soo was a historical inevitability.
Yoon says the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition Democratic Party are the politics of the first and second generations. He said the ruling party still imitates first-generation politics, which had been authoritarian and nationalistic. Yoon said the Democratic Party has not overcome the street politics of popular democracy of the second generation. The Democratic Party fired back, saying An must first show what his new politics are really about.
An Cheol-soo has not revealed whether the color of his so-called new politics is red, blue, or yellow. Merely criticizing the two rival parties will not answer all the questions people have for him.
The Saenuri Party took aim at Eoh Jin, calling him an outdated figure who has migrated from one political camp to another.
We have deep doubts about whether Yoon Yeon-jun is the right person for Ahn Cheol-soo's new politics.
During the 2004 general election, Yoon helped President Park Geun-hye, then chairwoman of the Grand National Party, now the Saenuri Party, restore the party's approval ratings, which had tumbled after it attempted to impeach late President Roh Moo-hyun. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Political wrangling at the National Assembly in the past year has done more than frustrate the Korean public. It's made this parliament one of the least productive in more than a decade. Lawmakers have submitted more than 8,500 bills since the current 19th National Assembly began work in 2012, which is a 23% increase from the previous assembly and a record high in Korean parliamentary history. But this assembly only passed just over 10% of the bills in its first year, the lowest rate since the 16th assembly, which began its term in June of 2000. The passage rate in 2000 was about 40%. The National Assembly Secretariat says the reason for the low passage rate is because of the continued wrangling between the rival parties and the subsequent lack of time for deliberation.
A new subsidiary of the state-run rail operator, Korail, could open as early as this week. The creation of the affiliate is what sparked the nation's longest ever rail strike last month, with union workers accusing Korail and the government of attempting to privatise rail services. Kwon So-ah has this report.
Korail's new subsidiary is a step closer to launch. The state-run rail operator says the affiliate, which will operate KTX bullet trains departing from Suseok, a station in southern Seoul, is beginning to take shape and may open as early as this week. Korail received a business license from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport at the end of last month and has set office at its headquarters in Daejeon. 50 employees, mainly from Korail, are expected to be dispatched within this week. The workforce will gradually expand to over 400 people. In an effort to minimize costs, Korail plans to hire externally, except for core employees such as engineers and crew members. Once construction of the railway is completed by the end of next year, the Transport Ministry expects an average of nearly 55,000 travelers a day to use the line in 2016. Korail says that as Suseok will be the second KTX departure station in the capital, the internal competition between it and Seoul Station will generate new demand, improve efficiency, and drive bigger profits. However, the labor union still believes Korail's move will eventually open the door towards the privatization of the company. Unionized workers filed a lawsuit last week demanding the government withdraw its license for the subsidiary. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose to a record high for the sixth straight month in December. The Bank of Korea said Monday that the foreign reserves held by Asia's fourth largest economy stood at over $346 billion, up nearly $1.5 billion from a month earlier. The central bank attributed the rise to a weak US dollar, which boosted the dollar conversion value of non-dollar assets. The euro strengthened 1.4% against the greenback as of the end of last month, while the British pound gained nearly 1% to the dollar. The number of foreign tourists to Korea increased last year, but that hasn't translated into economic gains as the relative strength of the Korean won appears to have made tourists that less willing to spend during their stay in the country. Son Jung-in reports.
The number of overseas travelers to Korea has been growing steadily over the last decade, with the number surpassing the 12 million mark for the first time just last month. This represents a 9% increase from the 11,140,000 visitors who came to Korea in 2012 to the 12,100,000 in 2013, according to the Korea Culture and Tourism Institute. Yet, the surge in foreign visitors has not resulted in a corresponding increase in the amount of income from tourism during the same period. The amount of production spurred by tourism decreased to $24.2 billion in 2013, down from $25 billion the previous year, while the number of jobs lost because of the loss of tourism revenue was around 6,500. Industry analysts say the reason for the trend is that tourists are less willing to spend in Korea because of the won's rise against the dollar. In fact, the average spending for foreign tourists was $1,130 per person in 2013, down from $1,207 in 2012, with their combined expenditure dropping by nearly $480 million. Experts say in order to turn the situation around, the government should come up with ways to customize package tours and improve customer satisfaction levels in order to meet the changing demands of foreign tourists. 손정인, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
The two warring parties from South Sudan were due to meet face-to-face for the first time on Sunday, but talks to thrash out a ceasefire deal and end weeks of conflict in the world's newest state appears to be delayed. The U.S. welcomes the talks, but says they should not be used to buy time. Kim Min-ji has the details.
Representatives from the rival parties in South Sudan are due to sit down for peace talks in Ethiopia, marking the first direct exchange between the two warring factions since conflict broke out last month. The talks set for Sunday appear to be delayed, with both sides yet to meet face-to-face for negotiations. The talks will focus on a ceasefire deal as well as the release of political prisoners. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has voiced support for the talks, saying it was an important step, but that both sides need to put the interests of South Sudan above their own. He also said the peace talks must not be a gimmick to buy time to win the upper hand on the ground. The fighting pits supporters of President Salva Kiir against rebels led by former Vice President Riek Machar. President Kiir accuses forces loyal to Machar of attempting to launch a coup, which they deny. The rebels have taken over major towns in the oil-producing region, while the international community has been on standby for what could be the first civil war in the world's youngest country. At least 1,000 people have died and some 200,000 have been displaced by the conflict. Meanwhile, fighting continued in the oil-producing Unity and Upper Nile states in the north on Sunday. Clashes also broke out in Juba late Saturday, with gunfire heard coming from a district in the south of the city before a CAM returned in the morning. In a separate development, a South Sudanese army general was killed Sunday in an ambush outside the town of Bor. The general was with a convoy advancing on Bor when rebels fired on it. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The United States is leaning on Israel and Palestine to make tough choices to reach a peace agreement. Wrapping up his 10th trip to the region in just 12 months on Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said Washington was committed to drawing up a fair and balanced peace plan. His comments came at the end of 3 days of shuttle diplomacy between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Kerry reportedly asked Abbas to recognize Israel as the Jewish homeland. Abbas has repeatedly rejected the demand, saying it would compromise the rights of Palestinian refugees and Israel's Palestinian citizens. Israel is also highly likely to reject any security concessions for an area of the occupied West Bank. The U.S. is bracing for a record-breaking chill this week. It's called the polar vortex, and it's an Arctic cold front that is expected to affect 140 million people, or nearly half of the U.S. population, with dangerously low temperatures. Our Connie Lee has more.
After being hit by a blizzard at the start of the new year, people in the Midwest and Northeast United States are now bracing for another blast of dangerous wintry weather. This time, a record-breaking one.
The National Weather Service warned Sunday that much of the U.S. will see temperatures that will be the coldest on record in almost 20 years. In a statement, the service said that it may feel as cold as -50 to -60 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's -45 to -51 Celsius on Sunday night over sections of the north central states. Under these conditions, forecasters warn that frostbite can occur on exposed skin within 5 minutes. The freezing cold temperatures are the result of what's called a polar vortex, an Arctic cold front that is set to descend over much of the U.S. By Wednesday, forecasters say nearly half the nation will be shivering in below freezing temperatures. Officials in several states have now asked residents to take extra precautions in the days ahead.
Cold really scares me, and as such that we will have temperatures that are potentially deadly or certainly life-altering temperatures right now, and we have to be very, very careful with that.
The state of Minnesota ordered all public schools to be closed on Monday ahead of the cold snap, and shoppers in other Midwest states empty shelves at stores to stock up on supplies. The latest winter storm comes after a massive wintry weather system hit the Midwest and Northeast a day after New Year's. The storm killed at least a dozen people, grounded more than 6,000 flights, and forced schools and government offices to close. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
At least 18 people have been killed in Bangladesh after police opened fire on protesters and opposition activists set fire to scores of polling stations during a violence-plagued parliamentary election. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's refusal to heed opposition demands to step down and appoint a neutral caretaker to oversee Sunday's election triggered the boycott. The European Union and the US say the election is flawed, as the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party's boycott means it's all but certain that Hasina's and his Awami League will return to power. Official results are expected later today, but the opposition has vowed to continue protesting what it says was a farce election. Now, Korea has come a long way over the years, but the nation still lacks much of a safety net for the most vulnerable members of society. Korea's ratio of social security expenditure to its overall spending ranks the lowest in the 30-member OECD. According to the OECD's Government at a Glance report on Sunday, Korea's spending on social security accounted for around 13% of its entire expenditure in the year 2011. Denmark and Germany, which topped the list, spent almost 45% of their overall spending on social security. On the other end of the scale, Korea ranked first for its expenditure on economic affairs, directing 20% of its total expenditure to that.
Let's now connect to our Lee Ji-hyun for the latest on the weather conditions. Hello there, Ji-hyun.
Good afternoon, Mark and Yusan. You know, it's winter festival season, and we talked about one of them last Friday. But actually, a lot of festivals and events are struggling to attract people.
Yes, well, I'm guessing that must have something to do with the weather, since you're the one talking about it, Jian.
That's right, Mark. Well, we've been having such nice winter weather, so we think that would make it easier for people to go to winter festivals. But these festivals consist of programs with ice and snow, so it's been hard for festival organizers to make enough artificial snow and maintain the thickness of the ice. I mean, even today, the high will be about 5 degrees higher than seasonal averages in most regions, and we'll continue to see mostly sunny skies for the entire day, and the level of fine dust particles will be normal. Now, tomorrow should be even milder than today, with the readings staying above the seasonal averages, but things will get a lot cooler. We have rain in the forecast nationwide on Wednesday, and temperatures will plummet later in the week. And on Friday, we'll wake up to chilly -10 in the Seoul metro area. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The high in Seoul will peak at 6, while Daegu and Gwangju will get up to 8, and Busan will see a high of 11 in the afternoon. Now for other regions, it looks like people in Jeju will enjoy mild afternoon with the top temperature soaring to 9. Daejeon and Dokdo will reach 6 and 3, but the top temperature on Kumgangsan Mountain will be at -1. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me today, and back to Mark and Yusun in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jion, for the weather there. Looks like we've got 2 more days of mild temperatures left, so we should enjoy that. But that does it pretty much for this Monday edition of Newsline at Noon.
And Mark and I will be back tomorrow at the same time here in Seoul.